Yes, welcome to Marvel Movie Talk. I am Christian Blatt, as I always am, but as it always is here on this show. Very excited to really continue talking about X-Men 97. And joining me for this installment of Marvel Movie Talk is a regular guest on various shows, but mostly this one, Jordan Blum. Jordan, thank you for being here.
I couldn't stay away. I had too many X-Men thoughts, keeping me up at night. I needed to
And
discuss them.
And there really are, in recent weeks, we've kind of talked about, Disney Plus is very happy to let you know when people like their content and just how much they like it. Millions of views for the finale, comparable to the views for the premiere. Retention is very important in whatever medium you're writing for, television, comics, movies, everything. And I think that it's hard to think maybe the last time that Marvel, any form of Marvel, put something out that everybody's like, oh yeah, I really like that, was Endgame. Can
Yeah.
you think of something? Because I can't, it's been
No,
5 years.
I think that this is the biggest hit they've had since then, at least universally beloved. And it's funny because, after Endgame, everyone's like, all right, well, we're gonna get one of Black Widow, get this, that. And
Yeah.
it's like we all know we're waiting for X-Men. I mean, that's the crown jewel. Fantastic Four and X-Men. It's treading water till we get to that. And
Yeah.
and we got it in animation form, and one of the best adaptations of X-Men ever. I mean, obviously the original cartoon was great at doing it, but this I think took it to a whole new level of kind of nailing the core of it.
Yeah, and I think that's the huge difference. And we've talked a lot about it on this show about how, yes, this is still appropriate for children, this show, but
Barely.
yeah, but that's what I was going to say. There's definitely moments. And, you joined us when we talked about the first two episodes, Jordan. So I wanted to have you back once we were all done. Now, you sat down and you watched, I think, the first two with one or both of your kids. Did they stick with it the whole time? Were there any times where you were like, well, Daddy's got to fast forward through this part where Uncle Logan has the metal ripped from his skeleton?
Yeah, no, it was I think my youngest son was in the bag, and then what developed over the course of watching it was he always liked Nightcrawler. Now it's nothing but Nightcrawler, huge for him. Except, again, very last episode, I'm like, yeah, those are that's a shot of Wolverine's claws inside Magneto. Is that what we're looking at? Like,
Yeah.
it got pretty gory, but we're really bad at censoring in my house, so he was fine. And my oldest, who had kind of moved on from Marvel, this pulled him back. Big Gambit fan, heartbroken to see him die, and then continued on with it, and it became they would wake me up on Wednesdays to go watch it and eat our sugar cereal. So it really became a tradition, united the family. My dream come true. I've been trying to plant this thing of X-Men being the most important thing in the world for years. They finally get it. So yes, it worked. It worked perfectly.
Yeah, I think that you and I have talked a little bit about how we always tread lightly in our household because we want them to actually like the things, not be terrified of it. And we were surprised when we showed my daughter Lucy, who's 6, Up. And apparently Act 3 of Up is a lot scarier than I remembered because we kept telling her, don't worry, it's going to have a happy ending. Well, the happy ending didn't come for 25 minutes. And when you're 6, they watched Honey, I Shrunk the Kids on a sleepover. My daughter decided she was just going to lay on the floor and go to sleep early because she's like, nope, too scary. So, tread very lightly because as we've talked about, you and I have talked about, and I've talked about on the show before, she does like the preschool Spidey and his amazing friends.
Yeah.
So she's there. She loves Kamala Khan as Marvel, so it's like, okay, the building blocks are there for sure.
Well, you can tell her with this, there is a happy ending. Logan gets bone claws. He loses his nose and goes feral for a little while. And then he gets his adamantium back and becomes Apocalypse's death. It's perfect. It's a nice happy ending for him.
Yeah, really. There's no trouble
No, it all works
There's
out for
smooth
Wolverine.
sailing eventually. And it's funny because you touch on all those things, and it's like, oh yeah, that's why those of us who grew up reading the X-Men love the X-Men, because it's just
Mhm.
like, when you think back of like, a character you're reading, any random issue, you're thinking about, like, say you're reading Uncanny X-Men 200, you think about like what everybody had been through in like the last year, you
Yeah.
know well, Storm lost her powers, and definitely spend a lot of time in bed,
Mhm.
and they fought the dire wraiths from the pages of Rom Space Knight, and
Yeah.
then they got sent, way back in time with Kulan
Uh-huh.
Gath, and you're just like, how did they tell all those stories?
They've been through all of it. Well, it's funny you say that because one of my first memories of X-Men was I bought a classic X-Men that was the issue after Jean dies, after the Phoenix saga, and it's literally an entire summary of the Silver Age as told through Cyclops' point of view,
Yeah.
and it's just dense continuity laid out, I don't know, 20 years of continuity, and I was like, "I'm hooked. I'm in. I
Yeah.
love how insane this is, like, all the things they've been through. This is the I wanna excavate all of that and understand this," and I think what you're hitting on is that the X-Men have this deep continuity that goes on forever and branches out into all these places, and I think the show is doing a good job of demonstrating that.
Yeah, and to that point, I'm sort of asking everybody this as I talk to them about it. So, Entertainment Weekly, obviously it's not really a magazine anymore; they just look for clicks. But
Right.
someone named Christian Holub, who again he has a great first name, he asked this question, and I think he's asking it for clicks. The X-Men are the future of the MCU, so why are they burning through so much plot? And I mean, anybody with even a casual understanding is like, there's what, 70 years worth of stories, thousands of issues
Yeah.
across multiple titles. I'm not worried about them running out of story. I'm just more in awe of how they weave these stories together,
Yeah,
that
how
like
you
one
don't feel like you're
episode.
losing out on anything. Like, you feel like you get a full meal. To do
Yeah.
Inferno, which I believe was, like, 10 years of buildup or something like that
Yeah.
Claremont was doing, and payoff, and then I don't know, 20-part crossover that's
Yeah.
spilled into everything, and they did it in 1 episode, and I felt like and did it justice. I think that's the magic trick of the show is not are they burning through stuff too much, but how they're able to perfectly adapt something within an episode and not make it a 10-parter. I think like even, if you go back and look at the original show, that's what they were doing, other than the Phoenix saga, which they took their time with, everything else was kind of like, yeah, we're going to tell this in a Saturday morning chunk, and move on.
Yeah, which I think it's obviously that's one of the ways that it's revolutionary for its time. The original series is that that's not the style of storytelling you got on Saturday mornings.
Yeah.
We talk a lot about how I loved Spider-Man and his amazing friends. I even, for all of its flaws, I enjoyed Super Friends. Which
Mhm.
was such the most watered down version of the Justice League you could ever have. And it was still like, okay, yeah, I like this. But by the
Yeah.
time this came along, I was older, and it was perfect because I could watch it with my little sister, and we both really liked it. We both loved the characters, and I even let her read my issues of the comics. I was very particular. It's like
Yeah.
you gotta rest them inside of a magazine so your fingers aren't touching the covers. You could imagine,
Right.
but I
Yeah.
still shared. I think I knew it was that important, and I think that for 30 plus years ago, the storytelling that was so limited because it was, like Fox had just started programming Saturday
Mhm.
morning, like a year or so before this. And they're like, yeah, we needed to fit into that and what the expectations were. So, yeah, to the point of Wolverine getting his skeleton ripped apart by Magneto, which I didn't think for sure we were going to get until it happened. Honestly, it was the episode after where I'm like, oh, okay, he didn't change his mind halfway through during the break between episodes.
Mhm.
I can't believe that's the moment that I've talked about. I was like, I can't believe they actually did it.
Yeah.
But to tell a little bit more adult storytelling, there were a couple of damn it's this season, Jordan. You never would have heard
I
that,
know, I know.
you
I
know?
mean, there was a 9/11 on
Yeah,
Genosha. Like, they went for it. Millions of mutants died,
yeah,
but I think kinda just to go back to the speed thing, are they burning through them? if they were just doing literal faithful adaptations, I think the show would be boring for me, someone who has read every single X-Men comic. But what I love is they are weaving together storylines. They're taking pieces and making it their own. Like they did this Genosha event, but they did it, without what's her name? Uh, uh, who's going to be in Deadpool? Xavier's sister. Um,
That's well. See, I was gonna say Cassandra, but I don't think that's
Cassandra
who that
Nova.
is.
Yeah, they
Oh,
did
it
it
is
without
Cassandra
Cassandra
Nova. Okay,
Nova.
yeah, yeah.
They Gambit dies, not other characters who had died in an original. Like it keeps me on my toes. They do things like take a character like Bastion, who I don't think was anyone's favorite X villain. He was kind of a throwaway. I remember
Yeah.
Zero Tolerance not quite landing as a story, and they went and they changed his origin and they made him a much more interesting character. So I love that, they're pulling pieces, they're doing them quickly, they're attaching them to other stories, and building their own continuity. So I'm constantly surprised as a viewer, even though I've read all of these.
Yeah, to the point of Bastion, I always found Nimrod to be more interesting than Bastion, and then
Mhm.
this is sort of like, son of Nimrod. And it was like, they really made him, an appropriate big bad. And, I have no problem with them doing the episodic storytelling for whatever platform where it's like, oh, clearly he's not dead. And even if he was, they'd figure it out. Let's focus on that episode 5, the Genosha episode.
Mhm.
Remember it for a moment, because the thing that I started thinking about and talking about on our show was, oh, they killed Remy, and they killed Magneto, and I was like, oh, they're not going to jump into Krakoa now, are they? And they didn't. But there was still that moment where I'm like, anything is possible. They could have,
Mhm.
and that could still, that could be season 3 or whatever. And the sort of the fusion of Genosha with Grant Morrison specifically is for Extinction. I was just,
Mhm.
there's definitely like lots of blending, and they did it so well
Yeah.
that I think we've all seen adaptations where they try too hard to just stick everything in there.
Mhm.
X-Men: The Last Stand comes to mind, Amazing Spider-Man 2 with Andrew Garfield, which a lot of that
Okay.
movie I like, but there's so much in there, and you're like, well, what are you doing? Just
Mhm.
tell the story that makes sense. And having it on streaming, where some episodes are like 40 minutes, others are like 27, it's like, yeah, just tell the story. And I think that that's why it works so well, because even those of us who it's like, we have the cheat codes, Jordan, we know where it's going. We don't actually know where it's going, because they're
No.
going to take a different way to get there.
Yeah. And it's amazing, just as someone who's also a writer, like the amount of beats and changes and moves within an episode. Like, they do Fatal Attraction, the first chapter, right, where Magneto came down to Ileana's funeral here. It's
Yeah.
Gambit's, and you have Rogue join instead of Colossus. You have these giant betrayals, Jubilee stuff. And I think, is it within the same episode or one episode later, they switch sides back again? Like,
Yeah.
it's so quick, but it doesn't lose any of the dramatic punch to it. And I think there's something about that pacing where the show can, fly through plot, but it knows when to slow down and make the moments count. So you actually feel like you're almost being tricked into feeling you got the whole meal. You get these tiny moments of like, let's slow the whole show down so Jean and Storm can reconcile, and have their amazing moment. And, stuff like that just from a pacing standpoint, I'm constantly blown away by.
Yeah, and I agree with what you said earlier, the idea that you can't do straight adaptations of even, the best 10 issues of X-Men, and like, well, we're going to just animate those. Which, I'd love to see it as an experiment, somebody try and do
Yeah.
it, but I can't imagine it would be as compelling. And I do
Well, we've
like,
seen that fail. That's the Zack Snyder Watchmen.
yeah,
To a
that's
degree,
true.
I think he misses the point of a lot of it, but like when you get the story, just told back to you slavishly, it's boring. Like it's already been done correctly in a different medium. Surprise me, give me something else. We don't, everyone says they want more faithful adaptations, but I don't believe that's true. People don't know what they actually want. They just say that, I think, personally.
Right. They want it to be good the way that the original was good, you know.
Yes.
And there's a lot of times, you know, like you don't want a literal adaptation of Mark Millar's Kick-Ass, especially Kick-Ass 2, you know. And you're like,
No.
no, let's you know, let's fix some of the things, you know. Perfect example is Thomas Harris's book Hannibal. Which you know, Jodie Foster was not interested in doing the film version, and even though that was a huge selling book, they're like, oh yeah, that does not work. We need to really play with that ending and have it
Mhm.
be a little bit more, you know, more applicable to major audiences. And I mean, you know, that's a Academy Award winning film, but I think X-Men is just as important to people like us, and to know that the people involved also know what it is that they've been entrusted with. And I don't know, that's really what we didn't get with comics a lot in the
Mhm.
80s. You know, it was a
Yeah.
lot of like, well, let's dumb this down for the youngest kid in the room, and other kids will just have to watch it, you know, to have it like to try to more elevate the storytelling in the original series. And in this, it had all the stuff we wanted. And that was sort of the point I was going to make a moment ago is I always loved the moments in X-Men or really any other series where it's like, oh, you know, they're outside and they're you know, playing softball. They're
Mhm.
going down to the bar and getting into
Yes.
fights because Peter just broke up with Kitty, you know,
Mhm.
and Juggernaut happens to show up. But, you know,
Yeah.
I love the character stuff. And you would think if that Entertainment Weekly article was right, they wouldn't have slowed down for the character stuff. But we got amazing character stuff from
Mhm.
so many characters. As I said on a recent episode, the thing that surprised me more than anything, I agree with your son, Nightcrawler. I didn't think we were going to get that much of him, you know,
No.
because he's always been so underserved. Not as underserved as Kitty, who we still don't have, but I digress.
She popped up in a
Yeah,
panel on the computer. Yeah.
right. I
Sorry.
know
Yeah. Or
it's
just
like
got plans for her. Yeah.
we're getting closer. But
Yeah.
the idea that you know, we spent that much time with him and we dealt with his faith, and he spoke at Gambit's funeral, and he does the swashbuckling, you know, and I'm just like,
Mhm.
if everything else about this season had fallen flat, I'm like, yeah, but they really did Nightcrawler right, you know.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm sort of interested in getting different answers from people. Was there a character who, over these 10 episodes, you were surprised, whether it's good or it's bad? You were like, wow, I can't believe how much time or what growth they had in these 10 episodes. Did
Mhm.
anybody surprise you personally?
Well, it's funny. I feel like everyone got their moments except one character, and I'll get to him in a second. I mean, besides Bishop, I think Bishop obviously was more a means to an end to get the Cable
Yeah.
story moving, and I assume there's much bigger, things coming down the line. And I think the show is kind of teaching you, be patient. We'll service these characters, I promise. But I thought not only did everyone get their kind of emotional moments, they got their like, this is why this character is the best mutant, moment where, I think Cyclops probably got the most, which is nice because I think, I feel like he got robbed a lot in the original series. And the same thing, Nightcrawler got his swashbuckling thing. Jean got her big fight at the end, with Cable, and Rogue got a ton of moments. Gambit got his big sacrifice, and charging up the Sentinel and all that stuff. The one character that I would argue was the most underserved is the one that shocked me the most. It was Wolverine. I think
Yeah.
Wolverine got the least amount of cool, badass moments. I kept going, oh, they're holding out. They're holding out. They're doing something very smart. He's the most overexposed character in the history of Marvel. They're underplaying him in a way that you're going to be desperate to get Wolverine. And then I almost feel like they did it so much that the moment at the end where he gets his adamantium ripped out, I wish I had a little more emotional weight to it because Wolverine felt like such a background character to the season. And I was wondering if you felt the same way, where that moment did hit as hard as I wanted to because they moved him so far away from kind of center stage.
Yeah, no, and we talked a lot about it as the season was going along, that it was impressive that they were able to tell the stories that they were telling at the quality that they were, and having Wolverine be in the background. It was downright, you know, shocking, and that's why I think it's episode 8 where
Mhm.
we have swashbuckling Kurt and we have Wolverine going sort of not 100% Berserker because,
Yeah.
again, they do want kids to watch, but the most that we'd ever seen. And personally, I've talked endlessly about how excited I was to have him in the brown costume, but we had all this
Yes.
stuff. And as we're getting that, Bodemeo, the showrunner for the season, had tweeted that, yeah, everybody should read Fatal Attractions. X-Men 25 was my favorite comic growing up. I'm like, oh man, they really are going to do it, aren't they? And it's the moment when we got so much Logan finally. I'm like, oh man, they're giving us this because they realized they did a disservice.
They didn't do as much with him. It's funny because I feel like it's like a monkey's paw wish, right? Because I'm Cyclops fan number one. I've always defended him. I don't think the original series did him any favors. I was always like, why is it always Wolverine? Let's give Cyclops a cool episode. And he got nonstop moments from the moment of the pilot of this new series. And I was like, okay, but as much as I'm sick of Logan, let's get back to Logan a little bit. And I feel like I didn't get that, but I'm clearly he'll play a bigger part. And I thought the stuff with him and Morph was great. The one-sided relationship of Morph yearning for him and Wolverine not seeing it. In that moment with Jean where Morph turns into Jean, and that's the only way he can kind of have that moment. It was really heartbreaking, and it made me love Morph. But I felt like I didn't get enough. Oh yeah, that's why Wolverine's a badass kind of moment.
Right. It's almost like if you only saw this season somehow, I don't know, in a vacuum, you're like, I guess that Wolverine's okay, but he doesn't really do much. And I think it was kind of at the expense of Scott getting so much time because it's not just the animated series. I mean, in the movies, Scott is just, so
talk about mistreatment.
Oof. Mistreatment is the perfect way to put it.
Off camera death in the third one. Oh my god.
Yeah, we talk a lot on this show, and I've talked to Claremont sort of about the storytelling that he didn't want to do, which was have Scott leave to do X Factor and have Jean come back and all of that, because he's literally choosing to abandon his baby so that he can go hang out with his old girlfriend back from the dead at the expense of spending time with his wife. And it's just like, it's such, I'm not a wrestling fan, but I understand what the concept of a heel turn is. That's that moment in Scott's life where before that you could say like before Uncanny X-Men 201, Scott is Superman, Spider-Man, Captain America. He's like the good in everybody. And then he's like, oh, kind of a deadbeat dad. What that I didn't have that on my Scott Summers bingo card.
It's a hard moment. And I feel like in the same way that Bastion was redeemed, this show found a way to still tell the Maddie, Nathan Christopher Summers story going into the future without making him look like a huge piece of shit. So
yeah, I think they were really focused on like, oh yeah, he's always like multiple generations think Scott's kind of a dick, and they're like, let's not do that. And it's another one of those things where I thought like, oh, are they sort of building to things that have come in more recent years, and perhaps they will. I wonder if the animated audience will ever take to Scott and Emma Frost, but you never know where they're going to go because literally it could be anything.
I thought that's where they were going because they brought her in for a little bit, right, for the Krakoa stuff, and I was like, oh, we're in Morrison territory. Here we go. Let me have to explain a psychic affair to my son. But they kind of gave some of that to Maddie as well, before they got rid of her. And I kept thinking she would join every episode. They'd set her up as a bigger character for 3, but she never kind of made the comeback. So maybe they're holding off. I thought she'd get her own title card by the end, like Nightcrawler.
Right. Yeah. I think it'll be interesting to see. And, they gave her sort of diamond skin powers, so they're definitely putting some breadcrumbs for us as there were throughout the season. I think that this thing that surprised me was not that Remy died, but that at least of right now, he stayed dead. And obviously there's that post-credit scene where Apocalypse is very interested in visiting the ruins of Genosha. And that's yet another story like, oh, wow, they're going to do that. Okay. So he's going to, Apocalypse is going to bring him back, which in the comics we saw him do with Angel and obviously with Remy and Logan. So it's like getting to really get to experience Apocalypse is probably one of the most exciting things about the
Mhm.
next season, because obviously he was in the original series, but I don't know, maybe they just didn't have. I'd have to really check the timeline. I don't know. Maybe the mythology of the character wasn't quite there yet, you know.
Mhm. But
So
they're not
yeah,
shying away though from unpopular story. I mean, I don't think anyone has any feelings about the time Gambit became a Horseman of Apocalypse. I think it's just kind of a forgotten, like, oh, that
yeah,
one, yeah, moving on. And I love that they're like, no, wait, maybe there's something here. We could, we have this great thing going with the Gambit Rogue thing and him dying. So I like that there are things that I think are overlooked by diehard X-Men fans. They're kind of like, wait, hold up, let's dust this off and see if this works in our show. And I think that's very exciting too, because again, same thing with Bastion. I'm like, Bastion, he's the big bat, and by the end, I was like, he's the best villain they've ever had on the show.
yeah.
So I think that's a lot of credit to them going, hey, if it happened in the 90s, we're going to look at it and play with it, and there might be something here, even if it wasn't executed correctly in the comic or beloved by X-Men fans.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times there are those ideas that it's there's a lot of reasons to do reboots and sequels and things, and usually they're financial. But sometimes it's like, I want to take another crack at that story. We want this character to try and get a moment to shine, something like that. But
Mhm.
so the idea that we'll get more Apocalypse in the next season, I mean, clearly, because they go
Mhm.
back to ancient Egypt, and then we're off in the future as well. So the idea that we'll be dealing with three different moments in time, it's a very ambitious big bite of the apple that they've taken out, Jordan.
Mhm.
And I think that is when we're going to get our Wolverine that we really want. We'll get like a solo episode of Wolverine, with the bone claws, forgetting everything, and all that. And it's very exciting to have something be this well realized,
Mhm.
and it's there's not a lot of times where, like we were talking about, people aren't usually happy about it, but it's like, I'm not usually this happy with something,
Yeah.
and as the season went along, there were definitely minor, like, I would have liked a little bit more of this. I don't know if that landed, but it was never like, well, I almost turned off the episode. No, of course I still watched it, and it was still great.
Mhm.
But I don't know. It's is there anything that, if it is minor, it's not even necessarily a complaint. Is there like, oh, I wish this had been a little bit differently. I wish this character had gotten more. I mean, we sort of talked about Wolverine.
Mhm.
Are there things that, now that we have the whole season, that maybe you thought we might get that we didn't?
I don't know. They're all greedy things. I'm like, well, there's Sunspot. Where's the rest of the New Mutants? It's like, well, that's just because I love the New Mutants, not because I
Yeah.
thought this the season failed to show them.
Yeah. How many
It's like,
seasons before we get Douglock?
yeah,
I mean, come on already.
yeah. And no, I mean, I really, even when they did like a filler episode, they only did half. They did like that half Jubilee Mojo one, but I actually thought it was a really interesting thing about what it revealed about Jubilee and her place and her journey over the season. So I don't even think there really was filler.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think that episode was designed to make you think it, but really you're moving that character forward to where she needed to be by the end of the season.
And I was glad they found a way to get Mojo in, because
Yeah.
I just thought he was an interesting character, especially like Art Adams' design of him, that everybody sort of stuck with thereafter. But he was great on the original animated series, and then this
Mhm.
idea that he's leaving TV behind for video games, I'm like, yep, that that definitely tracks, that he would have done that.
Mhm.
And I agree. That's like the half episode where you're like, okay, I don't know how much that moved along, but at the same time, you're also like, yeah, it was actually kind of cool to see that, to
Yeah.
actually get to visit with Mojo, even though it didn't fit.
And an
And
ode to the original show, which had much longer seasons and would have a like, we're just doing Omega Red this one.
yeah,
This is the one where Colossus shows up and then he never comes back, kind of
yeah,
thing. So that is what they used to do a lot more of. I think the show had way more serialized storytelling than most Saturday morning cartoons, but it still had its fair share of like filler episodes.
yeah, no,
Alpha
absolutely.
Flight, the Alpha Flight one is my personal favorite.
Yeah,
Uh,
I know, and we at least got to see some of Alpha Flight in the finale. And
yeah.
I asked this when we did our wrap up the day that it premiered. I still don't know why Psylocke was hanging out with Alpha Flight, but tell me that story, please. I would like to
Well,
know. So uh, And one of the things that I didn't realize when we first saw the episode, I don't know, I needed to be hit over the head with a semi clickbait article, but that season one finale of X-Men '97 also ties up the loose end from the Spider-Man miniseries, because you see Peter and Mary Jane on the street, actually watching something in the window, and I saw that, and I'm like, oh, I thought we just saw Spidey. That's weird that we have Peter and MJ, but it's, I guess, because that series ended and you didn't know if he ended up with Mary Jane or a clone or something, and they just were like, yeah, we're going to take literally 1 second to tell you, like, oh yeah, these two. And yeah, when we did episode 10, Jordan, we went through so many screen grabs of so many characters that we were so
Yeah.
excited to see: Cloak and Dagger and Daredevil,
They
and
were
it's
mutants for a
just,
little bit. Cloak
yeah,
and Dagger.
there was that moment. Yeah, I know. They had some synthetic heroin at one point, and then they were mutants, and then the heroin messed up their mutation, and
Yeah.
yeah, I know. And but it was great to see so many characters. Obviously, we have the episode where Cap shows up, and
Well, that was going to lead me to another point, which is, was anyone underserved? I mean, look, we've been living in it as an X-Men fan. It's been torture living in Avenger mania for the last 20 years, where these are the
yeah,
greatest characters and everyone loves them. It's like, they're okay. They're good. I love Cap, sure, but like, they're not the X-Men. And then I thought it was so funny that the Avengers get brought into this show, and they're sort of just these cops who hang out with the president and don't actually do anything to save the
no,
world, and sort of go like, aren't they nuking people?
yeah.
At the end, I'm like, damn, this is a real rough look for the Avengers, or is it setting up Avengers versus X-Men? But you're not going to get me to side with the Avengers, I'll tell you that much.
No, no, absolutely. And yeah, I mean, how can you animate Tony Stark in armor or out of it and have him not talk? It's like that's what he does, you know. And I was definitely a little surprised. I always appreciated that, like, even in, Uncanny 137, you just have glimpses of characters throughout the universe, like Silver Surfer looks up like, huh, that's concerning, but he goes back to
Yeah.
whatever he's doing. And I do like those moments of the shared universe, which, when the licensing was split up through so many different camps, you couldn't always do the way that comic book fans would have wanted to see. So I appreciated it, but yeah, I agree. Considering how Avenger centric it is in 2024 and the last few years, or the last couple decades, the idea that you have Iron Man, Tony's gone, left us in the movies, and you didn't do anything with him. It
They're
was a
just
little
hanging out with the
surprising. Yeah,
president in a bunker, being like, "Yeah, that meteor is going to fall. We're not going to do anything, but you should launch nukes at
yeah,
it or
yeah,
whatever."
yeah.
It was.
It's going to land on North America, so
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess
What can we do? We're the Avengers.
yeah, Brian Braddock's going to be fine, and Moira McTaggart doesn't care. But we're gonna be squished, and yeah, I know you'd almost think like Iron Man's like, yeah, let me see if maybe I can pulverize that meteor. I mean, at least I should try instead of
Yeah.
hiding.
Yeah. Do I have an armor for that? No, that one's in the shop. Oh
Yeah,
well. I guess it's up to the
yeah,
X-Men to save the entire
yeah.
world. Okay.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, but yeah. Rhodey borrowed that. I don't even know what he needed it for, but
Yeah.
all right, that's fine. And yeah, I thought that that was definitely surprising, but it was definitely washed out by the fact that, like, we got to see, like, Snowbird and Sasquatch and
Yeah.
North Star, and just the characters that we got to see, and it makes you, like you said, Jordan, you get greedy because you're like, well, yeah, what do they have planned? Are there ideas for a New Mutant series?
Yeah.
And even like a one-off, Excalibur. And yes, I'm still trying to figure out how they can bring Kitty Pryde to us, but and just so many of these characters. I love. Oh gosh, I almost forgot that we saw X Factor at one point. We saw Strong Guy, and we saw Multiple Man, and I was like, oh yeah, they're doing all the right things, but then when you have an episode like episode 5, that it's like, I guess Callisto's dead, I guess Leech is dead. There's all these characters that I
Yeah.
was like excited for like a minute, and then I'm like, oh no, why did you introduce them just to get rid of them?
Well, we got Krakoa coming down the line. Eventually, they'll have to get there. We'll come
I
back
think we
to that.
have to, right? That's the only way to
Yeah.
do it. And
Well, I was going to ask you, do you have any kind of speculation? Obviously, the last episode, you get those teasers at the end. And you can kind of call back to the comics that they're talking about. You have Adventures of Cyclops and Phoenix, where
yeah,
Scott and Jean were sent into the future to raise Cable, with Clan Ascani, which is Rachel Summers, and fight the future version of Apocalypse and Strife, who will, I imagine, will get the clone, right, of
Yeah.
Cable. So we get that teased. The Apocalypse that we see in the past is the one, is the Adam Paulina drawn miniseries. I forgot what it was called, but it was a origin story for Apocalypse where he first appeared like that. So we're hinting at that. I immediately thought, when I see the X-Men time travel, I thought, oh, is this setting up an Age of Apocalypse if we have all this Apocalypse stuff?
Yeah.
And then you have Forge and Bishop putting together a team. And my instinct at first, I was like, oh, is it going to be New Mutants? Is it going to be X-Force? And it's like, it's got to either be X-Force or Generation X, because if you're doing a 97 show,
Yeah.
you're going to lean into the teams of the 90s, and the two definitive teams, I think, of the 90s are X-Force in the beginning, the first half, and Generation X in the second half. So I'm wondering if you go any of those directions.
Yeah, those were the teams that we got in the 90s, I mean, the, New Mutants transition into X-Force, and it's even though there's characters that are held over, it's very different tonally and sort of what they do. Generation X, I think, is something that I feel like I would love to see some of those characters, but I just wonder. There's also so many X-Men that I mean, Morph turns into Colossus at one point, and yes, we've seen him, but it's like there's still plenty of those characters that they haven't done as much with, So I do wonder who they're going to sort of put together. And if I had to guess, I feel like X-Force brings us closer to Deadpool. So it's almost like they want to try to get that in there first.
Did you read somewhere that Deadpool is the one character who can't appear on the show or something like that?
I haven't read that, but that would actually make sense. That
I think I read that somewhere, that he's the one, I think, maybe to not mix up kids who are looking at the Disney app and like, well, I just watched him in this. This should be fine to watch.
I know. I mean, if you remember going back, I don't know, 5-6 years, Donald Glover had done like he'd written scripts for an entire season of an animated Deadpool series. And I mean, the little bit that the hints and the whispers that we know about it, like, oh my God, it would be like totally like the movies. How cool would that have been? And I guess we'll never know. It's like Noah Hawley's Doctor Doom script that we'll never know.
I'd love to read that. Yeah.
Exactly. I just want to read it, Well, I used to think like that. And then I read that Kevin Smith Superman Lives script with the giant spider in it. And I was like, okay, well, I don't always need to read it, but I feel like I want to read it. So, I think that we'll definitely see those. I think that they'll be smart enough and not do spin-off series, but that doesn't mean you won't get like an animated miniseries or movie, that'll kind of spill over from here. Let's get a Wolverine holiday special at some point. They did the Guardians one, which worked out really well. But
they're supposedly learning their lesson of not flooding it and making as many as possible, and it's less higher quality stuff. But if I'm a Disney exec and I see the numbers of X-Men 97, I ask for more. I don't think that's how those companies work. They can claim to have some sort of goal, franchise IP goal, but I think also at the end of the day, it's someone being like, we could get way more viewers if there's a Generation X.
It's like, well, this many people watch one X-Men show. How many would watch two? And I mean, it's why at differing times you had more than 3 Spider-Man series in the comics, and it took a long time, but they're like, oh, let's do another monthly X-Men series, and have sell a copy to every man, woman, and child on Earth, so that it'll break all the sales records, but actually have no real value 30 years later. So it's it was really impressive. One of the panelists on our show, David Brody, who I think you were on with at the beginning of the season, he was excited to see Sunspot, and he just kind of thought we would get more from him. We never really dealt with his father. They sort of downplayed the ethnicity, and in terms of how he was portrayed in the comics, and we didn't really get to explore him. But that seemed like one where I'm like, yeah, I think there's going to be time. We're going to, you know, we got so much more Sunspot than I thought we would get, Jordan.
Yeah, he's a favorite character of mine as well. I think New Mutants is my all-time favorite X-Men thing. So I was happy to have him, but yeah, I think he was much more of a slow burn character. Even the fact that he didn't power up until the very end, that it was the mutant that was still sort of in the closet, still not fully embracing his identity. I think that's what they were trying to play
Yeah.
in, and letting Jubilee, now the vet, take a character who was her in season 1 of the original show and kind of introduce them to the world of X-Men. But yeah, I think of all the characters, he had the slowest burn plot line. Well, everyone else was like, all right, this is my wife. She's a clone. That's my kid. He's in the future. Like his was like, I haven't really told my mom yet I'm a mutant. Like it was.
Yeah, and he's like, I'm going to use my powers just on my hand, but that's it. I don't want to actually,
but
turn
I want to
into
see
it.
him and Sam. I mean, that's one of my favorite friendships is Cannonball and Sunspot. So
I agree. I referenced them earlier. I do love Doug Ramsey and Warlock. I mean, there's such great storytelling from New Mutants, and I mean, Danny Moonstar is also a great character.
My favorite X-Man.
And
yeah.
and Karma, I mean, one of the things that I talked about on an earlier episode that I would love to see in a future season, and yes, speaking of Noah Hawley, we got a great depiction of him, but is Legion. To have Legion in an animated series where literally he can do anything. And I think that series, I really enjoyed it. I actually did an after show for it for AfterBuzz TV when it was
fantastic.
First run. Yeah. And just to bring him in and share him. And then obviously that sets up an Age of Apocalypse. There's it's Age of Apocalypse.
Yeah.
And so I think that, from the pages of New Mutants, I would love to see Demon Bear, sure. But it really comes down to Legion, just like what they can do with a character like that, and how all powerful he can be. But he's just the wires are crossed, and he can't get it all together. It's just such
great for Xavier, who's the ultimate teacher, but failed his son. That Xavier has a son he never talks about, who is holed away in Muir Island because he needs constant treatment, and Xavier has sort of abandoned him to kind of raise his other children of the Atom. So I'm talking about deadbeat dads. I feel like Xavier deserves a little shade, I think, as well.
Yeah, I mean, he's very focused on his team, his students, those children. But I definitely agree the way that he's like, oh, I can't fix the problem that is David. So yeah, I'm gonna have Maura McTaggart take charge of it. So yeah, it's the idea that we could be, well, whenever it comes out, 2 years from now, whatever it is, talking about like, oh yeah, and then in the middle of the season, Legion showed up, and they'd already had all the stuff that we know is coming. Rachel Summers was always one of the characters that I liked a lot. So you're talking about New Mutants. I became very partial to Excalibur because, one, the Alan Davis artwork was always beautiful every month, but it was also this idea that it was silly, and like Claremont decided he wanted to have a little bit of fun once a month.
And Doctor Who, yeah,
right, exactly. It was definitely his Doctor Who, and it also had my favorite characters in Kitty, Kurt, and I always really liked Rachel. So I was like, well, X-Men got too serious, and those stories were great, but it was a nice change of pace to have that. So if they're able to figure out how to, no, I don't expect even a miniseries of Excalibur, but I would love to see sort of that permutation of those characters,
absolutely. It's the book that had romps and fun and crazy time traveling multiversal stories before that was ever even that popular. They were doing it there.
I guess the problematic relationship between Captain Britain and Megan is the one thing that we'd have to revisit with a modern lens. But I found both of those characters interesting, and so yeah, it is of course very exciting to think about what the future may hold. But no matter where it goes from here, I couldn't have been happier with this. And I really do think like Endgame was the last time where I was like, oh yeah, this gave me everything I wanted and then some, you know.
Yeah.
And
Well, it was
uh
just incredible, right? To have this beloved thing from our childhood, to be starved of X-Men content for years, and then to have this thing come and deliver the best version of a show you think you remember,
yeah,
and to firmly establish the X-Men to new viewers, who they are, what they stand for, why this franchise is kind of set apart from the rest of the Marvel universe, why I think it's considered the most beloved of all time, and I think does all of that perfectly while still being incredibly entertaining, incredibly heartfelt. And the animation they pushed, I think, so far, it was gorgeous to look at. It was so well directed where it still felt like it existed in the world of the original while being, 1,000 times better in what they were able to accomplish.
yeah. When I was, we did a crossover episode with another X Men '97 podcast called X Pod '97 here on Geekscape, and as we were talking to them, it was just I don't know. Sometimes I'm a little slow on the uptake, Jordan. I was like, oh my god, the original series was all hand drawn animation. None of this was that, and it just like I didn't think about it until like I was in the middle of talking. I'm like, and they made it look that way,
Yeah.
they made it feel like it was the same universe. It's not like, it's not like hand drawn Garfield animated specials and then CGI Garfield. You're like, I mean, that doesn't even
Yeah.
look like, the same character. So I think that the creative people involved, it's like I said at the beginning, you can tell when people care about the characters that they've been entrusted with, and
Mhm.
it's not like, Ben Affleck doing Daredevil when he really wanted to do Batman,
Right.
and there's times where you can tell. Before we wind down, I want to talk a little bit about what you have coming on, but the first thing I wanted to talk about was I ran into you. I
Yes.
was at Comic
Pleasant
Con
surprise.
Revolution in Ontario, California, a few weeks back, and our visual audience is seeing me with our fearless leader, Jonathan London. I turned up on the main feed and Geekscape, where we kind of talked about a lot of the things that we saw, and one of the biggest surprises was I was just flipping through a bunch of old back issues, running my mouth about Nate Gray, the that X-Man version of Cable, and you looked up and were like, oh hey. So it was like, I've heard somebody go on about minutia and X-Men before, like that. Hey, so it was a pleasant surprise that
It
I
was a
ran
perfect
into
time to
you.
find you,
Yeah,
yes, waxing on about X-Man, the lone
yeah.
survivor of
I,
the Age of
I couldn't
Apocalypse.
believe that I came across issue 75. I'm like, it went that long. I mean, I assume it
What a
went even further,
while. There are people who
but
love that character. He even got a whole crossover,
yeah,
right before Krakoa, Age of X-Men. So there are people who love him. I enjoyed him in the Age of Apocalypse. I didn't really read his book too much, but
yeah.
yeah. But the back issue hunting was amazing there. It was a good con for that.
Yeah, and it's tough because as fun as it is to go to the modern cons, I'm going to be at San Diego for the first time in really more than a decade, so I'm excited, and it is fun to go there, but it's so different, and it's not like the comic conventions that I went to as a kid, where
Mhm.
I'd go to like the Holiday Inn in Wayne, New Jersey, where they'd have one
Yes.
once a month, and they'd send a limo to have Klaus Janson drive out and sit there. So I have a signed Punisher #1 of the ongoing, thanks
Nice.
to that con. Yeah, but you sent me an image of some of the stuff
Oh
that you
yeah.
had gotten, which I'm sharing with our visual audience. And it's funny because I had just earlier been talking to my friend Jeff, who I was there with, Jeff Winstead, who's been on the show before, that I had sold my #1 of New Warriors like at an all-time high, like in like 1993. I needed money for concert tickets, and it was
Yeah.
like when the demand for that was the highest. And I saw that you got some very recognizable books,
You can
Infinity
get that
Gauntlet.
book for a lot less these days,
Yeah,
but I love those characters. Speaking of characters to be on X-Men '97, that's another group that is definitively '90s.
Yeah.
by Fabian Nicieza, who wrote a ton of the X-Men 90s
Yeah.
books. So
Yeah.
they would make sense on the show. Also, Infinity Gauntlet, a classic 90s
Yeah,
storyline.
and yeah, and then that was like, it was obviously when that came out, Infinity Gauntlet, it was like, the Marvel, Captain Marvel, and Thanos, and all of this lore was so far in the past, and it was like wasn't being reprinted at that point. So I'm like, I don't know any of this stuff. It just gets
Yeah,
referenced in Avengers sometimes. So I was pretty excited for that. And you have some other characters. Firestorm. I didn't read a lot of DC, but I always liked that character. And then
great
like sort
design.
of
Yeah,
the final season of Super Friends, I think they called Superpowers, and he was there and Cyborg was there, and it
yeah.
was like they at least were understanding, like, oh yeah, let's bring some of these new characters in, and that's a character that you have to figure James Gunn has some kind of loose idea of like a Firestorm story written by so and so, directed by somebody else. There has to be that thread in his head somewhere because they've done I don't know of really much that they've done. Maybe some of those animated direct to DVD movies back in the day, but
Well, he's
it's
got my
great.
number. If he needs a
Yeah.
Firestorm pitch, he knows where to get
He
me.
knows where to find you. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. And and look, they were kind enough to give Jonathan and I media credentials for Comic-Con Revolution, but Jonathan found out about that con because I every year would talk about how much fun I had at it because it was a comic book convention. Yes, they had other
the
stuff. There were
comic
toys and
lovers
whatever.
con for
Yeah,
sure. Yeah,
and
yeah,
you can find the deals. And I showed you when I was there. I was very excited. We were talking about Kitty Pryde, and I
yeah.
actually got a it's like very fine copy of Uncanny X-Men 129. That's the first appearance of Kitty Pryde. It's the official beginning of Dark Phoenix. Even last year when I went there, I couldn't find anything under $300. I'm like, I want this book, but not that much. And I
Yeah.
got it for like 80. And I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to find a better deal on that.
That's a good
So
find. It's a great
yeah,
issue. Yeah.
I know. So, and it's like I had like, 130, the first Dazzler, like all the way forward, not all the way, but from the era that I was collecting every month. And I was like, oh, I can't fill in that gap. So it's great when you can find stuff like that,
Oh, totally.
and a lot of the comics are often in the backseat of comic conventions, but so you also have sort of the other side of the equation going as a fan and a reader. You go as a professional, obviously your work on Modok, but also to talk about Minor Threats, which you do for Dark Horse with Patton Oswalt and the great creative team over there. And currently in stores right now, as people are watching and listening to this, is Minor Threats: The Fastest Way Down #3, and talk about how it's going. And you do. I follow you on Instagram. I follow Patton on Instagram. There's a lot of signings for you guys, a lot of like interacting with fans, which must be great to just get to talk to people about these ideas that you guys have, and them telling you what they think about them.
Yeah, I mean, you want to get out there and you want to promote, and I think fans really respond to that. I did as a kid. When it came to, I stood in line for 3 hours to meet Jim Lee, I think once in New Jersey. So I get it. And, it's a crowded market. So you want to make noise and be the first people out there holding up your book saying, you should check this out. So we're always happy to do those. And so right now, this is the Minor Threats, The Fastest Way Down is the penultimate issue for our second mini-series of the main book, Minor Threats. We've had some spin-offs. We've got some that we're going to be celebrating at San Diego Comic-Con this year, some big announcements, some big creators coming in to play in the sandbox, and hopefully some other stuff we'll be able to talk about by then. But this is the second volume, and it follows Playtime, who's a supervillain who's trying to leave that world and then ultimately got pulled back in and has now declared herself the queen pin of crime for Twilight City, and has built her empire, and kind of everyone is coming for the crown in this series. So it's a kind of inside look to the world of C-list supervillains, and one kind of clawing her way to the top, if she can hold it
Yeah.
for a while. stuff. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And ever since I first started reading it, and I have enjoyed the concept of sort of the minor threats. You described it really well when I saw you the other day. The idea that it's like, characters who've sort of been rebooted and left by the wayside. And I'll often use the example of, Marvel at one point in the mid '80s had the bar with no name, where all like the D-list villains like Armadillo and characters like that, who I know turned up in Modok. I was very excited about.
Yeah.
So like all these characters that would turn up, and then this guy named Scourge would come and just murder all of them. So yeah, justice is served, and it was such a dark way to get rid of their characters. Obviously not everybody survives your stories, but it's like, well, at least they get to have a little bit more fun than just
Yeah, a
being
little more
depressed in a
dignity
bar. Yeah.
maybe than the Scourge. But yeah, I mean, I love those characters who are kind of gimmicky, low-level supervillains who aren't trying to take over the world. They're just, trying to pay their bills and grab a beer by the end of the day and knock over jewelry stores. And, they're the kind Spider-Man webs up in the cold open of his book, or Batman,
Right. Yeah.
hangs from a telephone pole. So I always liked those jobbers, and we wanted to kind of explore their
Yeah.
world, their underworld, and what it's like to, put on a snake costume every week just so you can knock over
Yeah.
a few banks.
Sometimes you want to know what Paste Pot Pete is up to. Some of the
Exactly.
minor characters, Will-O-Wisp, and the characters who you just go like, hey, whatever happened to them?
Yeah.
And it's great.
Wizard used to
And
call them the Morts of the month. They would do like one a month of like, this character's never getting over, this character's a loser. And I was like, I love these characters.
yeah. Oh no, I know exactly. It's they're such an important part of like the runs from when I was reading, and I never would have imagined the first Spider-Man series that I bought was Peter Parker the Spectacular Spider-Man, the mouthful of a title it had back then. And I always thought the character Spot was interesting because he was kind of silly and goofy. I never would have imagined he would be such a heavy in Into the Spider-Verse Part 2, and obviously into Part 3. I was just like, I would never have imagined. So it's great when people see the value in some of these characters. And obviously one of the things that I'll talk to you about whenever you have a new ongoing series is you're always nice enough to send me advances for some of them, and then I'll usually go out and buy a variant version of it.
Yes,
And
appreciate it.
you've had some amazing variants. Mike Mignola, I don't think that was this series, I think that was the previous one. But I can't imagine that you would think, as a kid reading comics, is like, well, one day I'm going to have a Mike Mignola cover.
That's unbelievable. Yeah, I actually just acquired the Mike Allred one he did for the new volume, which is again a legend.
Yeah.
Growing up, I have the one. The Kevin McGuire one is behind me. They're just every time they ask who do you want, we're like, well, who were the people that I worshipped growing up, and most of the time they say yes, which is shocking. So we're very lucky.
Yeah. No, definitely. And it's great to get those choices. And you there's always the chance that the one day you're going to get the email from like a Liefeld or Todd McFarlane and be like, hey, I'd be interested, and you're like, what? Because I don't know, I mean, it's I've had some, as an adult, my perspective on some of the storytelling is like, oh, some of it wasn't as great as it was, but visually, I mean, it made comics so exciting when the Image guys were still Marvel guys, that period. And, it's always great. And people can say what they want about Rob Liefeld, but if anybody listens to his podcast, just how much he loves comics, but he also loves the gossip. I don't know if you've ever listened to it, but he does episodes
yet, no.
So he does episodes. He's been doing it for a few years. He started during the pandemic. He does whole episodes, Jordan, on feuds. So there's one that's Todd McFarlane versus John Byrne. And I wouldn't pick a side in that one because neither one of them comes off very well. And it's just like, and he's like, it's not like, oh, here's my opinion. No, I have this issue of Wizard from 1992 with these quotes from John Byrne. He just goes through it and all that. Yeah. And I was like, man, people can say what they want. Rob likes to say, I keep the receipts. So it's great when you can have people who can cheerlead the comics that end up making the animated series and movies. And it's exciting for, when in that picture that I showed from the con, you had a Batman 89 shirt. Before
Mhm.
Batman 89, man, comic book content was you just had to take whatever they gave you and just like the animated Spider-Man series where he basically is shooting ropes out of his arm,
Mhm.
and it was
Yeah.
like. Yeah, it was like the Incredible Hulk series was the one thing where you're like, at least he looks right,
I
So
never thought we'd be where we are today, where you're like, I don't have time to watch that one.
yeah, no, exactly. I mean, I love the
Yeah.
first season of Invincible, but I have not had the time to dive into season two. So there's always great stuff, and it's a great problem to have. And Jordan, I always appreciate you taking the time to chat, whether it's at a con or here on the show or wherever else I might run into you. Let everybody know where they can keep in touch with you and keep abreast of all the big announcements at San Diego Comic-Con.
Yeah, I'm Bloom Jordan on Instagram and Twitter and all those things. And then if you are interested in Minor Threats, there's a Minor Threats DH account on both of those as well that will give you those updates. We had to hire a marketing person because we couldn't keep up ourselves, and it's a good problem to have. But we're very grateful to have him running that account for us. So
I have been reposted by Minor Threats DH when I'll take my standard photo holding the new issue, and
love
Minor
it.
Threats DH is very kind to do that. So yes,
Awesome.
all great stories, great chatting with you, and looking forward to running into you over the one section of San Diego Comic-Con that does have a lot of comics and
Yeah, that shrinking island I'll find you on for sure.
yeah, right, exactly. I'll be like, oh, maybe I do want to replace my new Warriors one now, and all of that.
I'll keep an eye
Uh,
out for it for you too.
Absolutely. A glowing cable or strife eye. In any
Mm.
case, as always, I can be found on social media at Christian DMZ. Please subscribe to this show and all the great shows here at Geekscape. And we'll be back next week with some more fun conversations, X-Men 97 and beyond, as we get this much closer to Deadpool and Wolverine. But that is all the time we have for right now. Until next time, as the great Stan Lee would say.